Welcome to the Paru Zings, Appraisers on Purpose podcast. This podcast showcases inspiring appraisers and professionals from the industry who are leaders in their field. How did they get to where they are? What have they learned along the way? And what do they do now for their teams, their clients, and the industry? Your host is real estate investor, entrepreneur, and appraiser, Michael Hobbs.
Well, welcome back. We are excited once again to have another conversation with an industry peer. Once again, a fascinating individual with an impressive experience across a range of valuation, not only assets, but segments of the industry, which we always find valuable, insightful, and hopefully enjoyable along the way, because it's not every day that we get the opportunity to hear from a peer who has this type of experience. And today is no different. I am excited that Meghan is joining us. Meghan is up to some phenomenal things. But before we even get to that, I just want to say, Meghan, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, Michael.
Hey, I appreciate it. It's great to come right off a holiday weekend, beautiful day outside, and be able to spend some time here. I only wish we had a nice little like Italian coffee sitting outside with the lovely sunshine and small table at like a cafe. But instead, we're here doing a podcast.
That's all right. We'll make it work. And we're loving that spring has sprung here in Chicago. So here we go.
We are grateful that spring has sprung. I was catching up. A friend of my wife's family member was in town over the weekend, and they were talking about how nice it was to come to cooler weather since they live down in Florida. I was like, well, we're grateful that it's getting to a more enjoyable temperature. That's why we endure those winters here in Chicago, so we can have the rest of it. So with that, Meghan, we'd love to always ask that opening question. Were you born this way, or how did you end up in the valuation and appraisal profession?
No, I was not born this way.
Oh, wow.
I didn't even graduate high school or college understanding what commercial real estate was.
Oh, you neither? Oh my gosh, thank goodness. I thought it was just me. Oh my goodness, so you had no clue. Oh my goodness. Tell us about it. So what happened? High school, college?
That's right. So I went to college. I just was looking, actually French was my passion. I wanted to learn how to speak French. So
wow. Love it.
I went to school called Truman State University. It's in Kirksville, Missouri. And what brought me there was swimming. So I swam, went through that program. It was an excellent experience. But ultimately, that is how I ended up at Truman State University. I grew up in Eastern Iowa. I wanted to go out of state. So I went a whole hour south of the Iowa border into Missouri. Really ventured far. It was a 3-hour drive to my hometown, but it was a fantastic undergrad experience. But I learned pretty quickly that I wasn't interested in French literature, and that's what you learn about primarily when you're a French major. So I kind of took another look at what my goals were. By the first, end of the first semester, I decided to switch to a business major and a minor in French, which served me well. I was able to study abroad and spent some great time in Nice, France for a semester, and swimming kept me busy along with a lot of other organizations. But at the end of the day, when I graduated college, the only thing I really knew was that I grew up in a very small town. I grew up in a town of 3,000 people in Eastern Iowa. So I knew
3,000 people, Meghan. So that means you had more than just a stop and go light.
We had the only stoplight in Cedar County, Iowa. So quite a small, town and school. A very rural upbringing, which I love, I cherish. I still go back and enjoy my time there. My parents are born and raised there as well. But I knew from about second grade on, when I learned that the city of Chicago had a greater population than the entire state of Iowa, that I wanted to get to our neighboring large city only a few hours east of us. So I moved to Chicago right after college, and a family friend had forwarded on an open, just entry-level research analyst position at a large global commercial real estate services firm.
Yeah.
So I applied, and this individual was only willing to hand me the opportunity to interview, not to put in a good word. But I did a good job. I interviewed well and got the position, and I stayed at that.
So Meghan, if I may, I want to interject. So here you are, you come out of a small town, 3,000 people. You're excited because you have the one stoplight in the whole, I think you said county. So, I mean, that's quite an accomplishment. I mean, I'm sure they attribute that to you and the family, of course. But
that's right.
So you're a competitive swimmer and you go to Truman. Is that what division? Is that Division 2? Division 2? Okay. how'd you do? I mean, so were you like good friends with Michael Phelps? Like, I mean, I don't follow swimming much, but
So no, I don't know Michael Phelps. I have.
you mean he doesn't know you? Maybe he doesn't know you. Is the right
I,
way to say it.
I do have a few friends that have gone to the Olympic trials and tried. No one's made it. There were a couple of people with dual citizenship, and their siblings were able to swim on their teams, not for the U.S. It's highly competitive, obviously. So D2, but we had a lot of great success, actually. My sophomore year, we won the NCAA Division II championships. I'm an All-American on a relay, and it was excellent experience. We had a lot of great success. I made a lot of lifelong friends, and my sister, actually, who's 2 years younger than me, ended up coming and swimming there as well. So it became a family affair. But ultimately, that really taught me, how to balance or to create, to really leverage the work ethic that my parents instilled in me coming from a small town, and balance work and how demanding NCAA D2 training is for swimming, right? And all of that set me up well.
Yeah, I mean, at that point, a lot of people probably have not had the experience to be a collegiate athlete, much less to compete at the level that you competed at. And maybe, if they went to college, university, they maybe knew someone who was on the team, but they don't have any perspective of how much responsibilities and how many concurrent things must be managed as both a student and an athlete.
That's right. And all through high school, because I did go, graduate from a small school, I played 4 sports. So athletics has always been a big...
Did you say 4 sports? You didn't say Bo Jackson 2 sports. I heard you say 4 sports. What were the 4 sports?
Yeah. So I swam in the fall. I played basketball in the winter, and I was a hurdler on the track team in the spring, and I played softball in the summer. So I was a catcher.
Wow.
Softball was my favorite sport, followed closely by basketball, then maybe swimming. So just happened to have better success at swimming. But all that taught me teamwork and collaborative efforts and leadership skills that I utilize to this day.
That is such a wonderful perspective on doing something that you enjoyed, or maybe almost enjoyed as much as others, and sticking with it, and then getting to be part of something that would never, say, be on your own. I mean, you just go to the pool and swim. It's not the same as being part of that team and learning that collaboration that comes from, it sounds like you were a 4-year athlete as well.
3, actually. I did not make it my 4th year because I really wanted to study abroad in that experience. So I did not swim my 4th year. I swam 3 years, and that study abroad experience was really valued. It opened up my eyes to, how different people live and navigating a new, geography on my own and a language. It was an excellent experience.
And that was a whole year, or is that just half a year?
That was just 1 semester.
And so I did not pursue that. I'd love to hear, maybe for people that aren't familiar with this, but depending on where they did attend university, or maybe they have family that might be attending that, many times an opportunity to study abroad can exist. And specifically yours was in another country, speaking their primary language was not English. Did your world exist in French, or was part of your education in English and in French? How was that for you?
That's right. It was both. I studied in Nice, France at a school called EPOG. It was a business school, an international business school. So all of my finance classes and kind of behavioral science type stuff, that was all in English, but then I took advanced French.
Fantastic. Well, I apologize that I only took a couple years of French in high school. Hardly remember anything. Won't even try to now. Otherwise, we could have totally done this in French, but I would have failed. So glad we're not doing that. Absolutely glad we're not doing that. So one of the pathways to Chicago wasn't being a French literature professor. Instead, you get this introduction, like I said, not even so much an endorsement, but an introduction to a valuation firm. Did that keep you in Missouri or Iowa, or did that take you to Chicago?
That was here in Chicago. So I moved to Chicago. I applied for the entry-level research analyst position at the commercial real estate services firm. And it was fantastic. It had nothing to do with valuation. I still at this point now barely know what commercial real estate is, but I'm researching it every day and building up a database on availabilities throughout the Chicago metro area when it comes to office space. So my first job was running around the city of Chicago, taking photos of all the towers, and then jumping in my car and taking photos of all the suburban office buildings and populating the database. And that was really my first entrance into a web-based application and how powerful data aggregation could be. But again, it was entirely in the research pool that was servicing the tenant rep and office agency brokers. So it wasn't still not on the valuation side.
But nonetheless, you're getting this exposure. I mean, if maybe I'm trying to get a picture in my mind. So I've seen the car when Google was really building out their visual database, it had all those cameras on top. Instead, it was Meghan in the car with like some kind of camera in her hand. Is that kind of the visual that I'm getting?
Correct. This is back. I did have a digital camera. So it's not like
digital camera.
Yeah, I didn't have to develop any film. This was right at the beginning of the digital camera wave, and you come back and plug in your computer, plug in the little card to your computer and download the images and upload them to the database.
Oh, goodness. Yeah. So you get exposed, and we're talking approximately 2 decades ago. So you're getting exposed to this concept of databases and large availability of information, and you're actually helping contribute to the real-time nature of accuracy.
That's right. And we also, and leveraging a call center actually at the time as well. We were managing a call center offshore that was calling on all of the economic specifics of any of the space that might be available to populate the database so that the tenant rep brokers or the agency, brokers could take a look at the information and leverage it to, generate leads for clients to service. So it was fun to kind of see how it all came together. And it was all about the office market at that point.
I get it. So in this case, in addition to taking the photos, you had team members who were actually making phone calls to be it property managers or other brokers in the marketplace. And that was really kind of supporting the work you were doing.
That's right. And then we leveraged the individual, like as you call on individual office towers to figure out what their availability is, you then can deduce what their occupancy is on a quarterly basis. So from our database, we would grab the statistics and create our own proprietary commentary on submarket and market fundamentals when it came to supply and demand of office space in the Chicago metro area.
Wow. So in this case, talking about, basically first person activity as a result of reaching out, surveying the market and understanding what the vacancies are, you can back into occupancy, and then you get a sense of what's the health of the market, what are the trends and what activity is going on.
That's right. And it was all in the service of the, brokers that we supported with that data and the clients that they interacted with, which was really a great base for what ultimately became a valuation career because, you really learn to be very resourceful as a researcher and, communicate and get what you need from someone quickly to move on to the next one because you're dealing with high volume type scenarios. So it was an excellent base for what ultimately became a long career in valuation.
That's fascinating because a lot of people maybe that don't come up through a similar path that you've had may not be anywhere near as familiar with the duration of your outreach and your market analysis. And then you talk about resourcefulness, which is always an important characteristic in this profession. Do you have any particular recollection of an experience you had that really pushed you to be extra resourceful back in those days to get the information in an efficient manner and get on to the next opportunity?
Yeah, I think I found, I kind of learned from maybe other people's mistake around me quite a bit. There would be a request that came in maybe from a broker on understanding new construction pipeline in the city of Chicago and how they wanted to graphically lay it out. And some of my counterparts would say, oh, we don't have anything like that. And it was the first time where I just said, well, we don't have anything like that, but there's no reason why I can't leverage this map and come and research the data and then put it together and come up with a piece that would help. And then we would satisfy your needs. So I think it's that during that time, I really learned that as a researcher, you can say, let me check or let me explore that. And no just really wasn't ever part of my vocabulary. That's kind of what I ultimately came down to is if someone asked me before I said no, I was going to exhaust all opportunities to see if I could satisfy their need and come up with something that was mutually agreeable. And that has carried me through the vast majority of my commercial real estate service career.
I think whether it was valuation career, whether it would be business development, whether, you name it, that willingness to receive the question and, as I think I heard you say, replying not necessarily yes or no, but saying, hey, let me explore that and have a little time to investigate and get back to you, and then offer at least some kind of solution. I mean, what a way to create a satisfying experience, both for yourself for making progress or achieving something that hadn't been done, but also for them that they didn't get an immediate no. That's fantastic.
That's right. Yep. That has served me well throughout my career. And I would say right after I got married, we ended up moving markets, which had also served me when I was learning a new geography as well. So we moved from Chicago to Washington, D.C. At the end of 2005, and I spent 5 years there. And that is where I was introduced to valuation.
Oh, wow. So did you move out there with what I interpreted based on some of the things you said was that the work you were doing supported brokers. And then you mentioned the change in life status, exciting. You get married, you end up in DC. And then you're moving from working with brokers to working with people in the valuation space?
That's right. Yeah. So the opportunity was to transfer and take over for an employee who was on maternity leave for a few months. And so I transitioned to a research analyst position in the DC market. And the goal was to become a tenant rep broker. That's kind of what I knew. It's when I saw I liked the dynamic relationship building aspects of that world. And when I got to DC, the contract ended, or the need for the filling in on a temporary basis for the gal that was on maternity leave. I ended up taking a research kind of junior appraiser training opportunity within the valuation department of this commercial real estate services firm. So still with the same firm, but I'm now in another service line, leveraging the skills and research capabilities that I had developed over that couple of year time frame, but now applying it to assisting appraisers and building up a database in terms of sale and rent comps so that all that information was aggregated in one place to really speed up the process and allow them to see the whole kind of universe of information available to them to create their opinions of value.
Oh, that's fascinating. So here you are again gathering information, but instead of driving it towards the tenant rep side, the brokers helping out, occupiers of space, be it, businesses, organizations, you name it. Now it's sales data, I heard you say, as well as rental data.
That's right. Yep. It's all the support that we appraisers use to create that credible opinion of value and support it and tell the real story, behind the asset in that market.
Ooh,
so during that time, it was really fascinating, Michael, because, I could take what I learned in Chicago and what was needed on the, occupancy side, right? The space usage side. And then we got to layer on the skill set of understanding, how you use that information to actually create a value for an income producing property. So it was really a good progression in understanding like where all the information comes from and how it's used and how valuable it is when you start to aggregate it.
Meghan, that is such an interesting perspective that a number of people in the valuation industry actually share with you. And that is they started out in some capacity or another in brokerage or on a brokerage team or in a research capacity. And then in your case, as well as a number of our peers, they get an opportunity to move over into valuation, as you point out, which is actually doing a good bit more with that data. And it's more focused towards both the support of the internal database, so you have access to a lot of information, but more importantly, to help support specific requests of clients as opposed to, a broker who's going out and making sales. What was that experience like in the change of your focus? I mean, research still a lot, sounds like resourcefulness, very high, satisfying requests. But the people you interacted with were focused on a different activity.
Yes, they were, but I never stopped interacting with the brokerage side either, because I always found it to be fascinating to understand kind of the big picture of everything that was going on. So I learned a lot from the senior appraisers about the appraisal profession and what all goes into ultimately putting together a credible opinion of value and leveraging the data that's available to us, researching it, which that base was already there, and then how to write about it, how to explain what how you decided to select certain comparables and all that good thing. But I always stayed involved in the sales meetings. I kept showing up to the investment sales meetings for the office and any kind of, when there's a tenant rep meeting, I stayed in there because I was valuing office and industrial space and I wanted to hear what was happening with the actual boots on the ground. So always stayed connected to what the market was doing, because at the end of the day, that's our job, right? We mimic kind of what market value is. And you can't do that without understanding, the incentives of the buyers and sellers and their brokers. So always paid attention to that.
What a wonderful, as you would say, inside the room opportunity, as opposed to just kind of floating around. Or as you said, when you started out, being in a car taking photos, it's very different from sitting in a meeting with, the investment sales team or a sales meeting, hearing about the office and industrial space use, needs, challenges. And yet you're doing that now in a whole new market. Was it very difficult to move from a geography like Chicago to DC, where, again, real estate's real estate, but a lot of different participants, maybe different motivations?
Yeah, at that point in my career, it wasn't too difficult because I hadn't established my name yet in either market, and I had the base of research, so I was able to become, pretty knowledgeable quickly once I got to DC.
Yes.
Which helped. And I will say, so I took all of my appraiser trainee. My path to valuation did not stop, though, there. I actually took all my trainee courses and got my, trainee's license in the Mid-Atlantic region. Practiced for a little while, but I was out there for 5 years, Michael, and I only spent the first 2 years as in valuation. I spent the last 3 years in investment sales. So I was part of an investment sales team because, if you recall, this is now 2008, and we are rolling into the thick of the GFC, as we came to know later. So I thought, well, there's going to be all this opportunity to dispose of assets because of distress. So I'm going to join the investment sales team, which was an excellent experience. But we did not, if you recall, end up selling all that much because there was a lot of blend and extend and not a lot of institutional assets actually went to distress. We ended up doing a lot of BOVs, talked with a lot of clients, sold a few properties, but it was an invaluable experience because in the appraisal profession, we are often taking a deal that has been looked at for months and months and, someone either through acquisition or financing purposes has come to what they believe, to be a market-oriented value. And at the end of the day, we're obviously a very important part of the capital markets. We're a risk mitigator. And but it's very much more like rear view looking and back end of the transaction. So it was invaluable for me to take everything that I had learned on the research side and on the valuation side, but then apply it to the investment sales side, because that's really more market leading. That's setting the market and understanding kind of how to push it, what's next, right? And so that type of understanding of buyer and seller motivation ultimately ended up serving me very well in what now has been a call it 11, 12 year specific appraisal career, and teaching the next generation of appraisers and explaining kind of the big picture of what we do as appraisers and how it fits into the rest of the market. All that background really served me well.
Well, and it's great to hear that through this, through the GFC, through the great financial crisis, that you stayed engaged. I mean, not, a lot of people struggled during that time frame. And I hear that you demonstrated a substantial amount of flexibility, both being in the valuation side as well as investment sales. And somewhere along the line, it sounds like you came to a decision point and you moved away from investment sales.
That's right. So what happened was I got married in my mid-20s as I met my husband at Truman State University. So in college, right?
Oh, okay.
He was from Chicago. We moved to DC, obviously together just after we got married, and spent 5 years out there. But around that time, it was, we started thinking about starting a family. And we loved DC and had great career opportunities out there. But at the end of the day, both of us grew up around our family and we knew that we wanted to, start a family and raise our kids in the Midwest, somewhere where it wasn't as far to travel to hang out with the extended family. So we moved back to Chicago and I explored some other opportunities. But at the end of the day, I knew we were going to start a family, and I knew the flexibility that the appraisal space would allow for me in terms of being a young family, being the female, right, the mother,
that
had to take care of the kids, especially when they were babies. And the valuation profession really looked like it was going to afford the most opportunity to, have a good income, create the client base, but also have enough time to raise small children. And that's exactly what it did. I think that the appraisal profession is fantastic for females and anyone with a young family, because you can really set your own hours.
Meghan, that's a ringing endorsement on many different fronts. And I'm really grateful that you touched on that, because I think that's one thing that gets missed a lot in people's discussions around being in maybe a particular industry, valuation specifically, and you talk about flexibility. It doesn't mean that you're not working hard, doesn't mean that there might not be long hours, but you also, what I'm hearing you say, and please correct me if I'm wrong, is that you had a sense of who you and your husband were and what you all wanted and what steps you were willing to take to get it. And after some thorough research, you identified staying in the profession, if you will, or staying associated with the profession you'd been a part of as a way to really fulfill on what was important to you.
That's right. Yep. Yeah. So I stayed with the same firm, moved markets again back to Chicago, and joined the valuation advisory group.
Oh.
And that is where, and I did that because of the flexibility I knew it would afford. Plus the earning potential was great, right? I had the background. I knew I could make a go of it with my own business development and, knowledge that I had gotten over the years. And, I already knew the Chicago market. Although I will say, moving back in 2011, coming from our nation's capital, we were basically coming out of the recession in 2011. Multifamily had started to take off. There were cranes everywhere.
Yes.
And when I moved back to Chicago, I basically prolonged my recession for a good year because I was still dealing with declining cash flows in the Midwest.
Oh my goodness. So what I also hear you saying is you now have gotten exposure to another asset group, whereas you'd come out of, I thought you said office and industrial out in DC. Now you're coming back to Chicago, but you're changing over to multifamily.
That's right. There was an opportunity to lead the multifamily team, or at least just start working on multifamily, because no one had been specializing in it. And this was around the time that specialty practice groups at the larger national firms had started. And being in a big market, you can specialize in an asset class. So there was an opportunity to take on multifamily. Multifamily is significantly easier to underwrite than some of the other income producing properties out there. There's not a lot of expense pools you have to figure out or NRA issues. It's fairly straightforward, and there's a lot of it. So, and I also, multifamily is a draw for me because it's easier to see how it impacts people's lives, right? Like you're creating, like they're allowing you to come into your space on those inspections, and you can engage with some of the folks on the inspection, and that, if it's an agency loan or if it's an affordable property, you're allowing good quality housing to stay in circulation. And it's really nice to kind of see that. It's right. I mean, housing's a basic need. So it's a good business to be in because it's not going anywhere.
Yeah, very much so. Very much so. And it's, it's prevalent out in DC. It's prevalent here. But as you pointed out, after getting to extend the GFC for a little bit for you coming back to Chicago, you got to be active in that exciting time, which was multifamily growth here in specifically Chicago. But it sounds like you were probably part of the Midwest is what I'm gathering.
Yes. So when I started focusing on multifamily, it was primarily in the Chicagoland area. I had my first child at this time and was kind of working from home for the first 6 months and going out on inspections. So I had a setup both in the office and at home, and was really making it work, for a good couple of years by myself and raising a young family. When I was pregnant with my second child in 2015, that's when I realized that I had gotten my billings to a level at a national firm that unless I wanted to keep working like Saturdays and Sundays, I needed to leverage some assistance. So I did hire a trainee while I was pregnant with my second, and that wasn't necessarily to increase my billings. It was more to get some time back in my life. So that's really what I valued at that point. I needed to be able to know that, like, if I had to be out of the office or, if I was working on something else, this task was getting done. And that's really where I learned, started to really figure out how powerful it was to aggregate the information, create processes, work as a team, and really create some efficiencies throughout that process, even without technology. Just scaling an individual to understand what the process is and getting them up to speed allowed my billings to increase exponentially without even, really trying. It was just easier to take on more work. Yeah. And on top of that, I was billing more and still working less, which worked out well. And that's not to say that my training was working, 80 hours a week. They were able to keep a meaningful 45, 50 hour a week work week, which is pretty standard at this point.
That is really encouraging to hear. And one thing that I think you made reference to, and that is, I mean, you didn't talk much about it, but if you could, because you had experience doing research, you had experience in investment sales, you're now in valuation, you talked about the importance of your billings, your book of business. For those that aren't familiar with that, what does that entail?
Sure. So if you're at a national fee shop, you're typically on commission.
Oh, okay.
So you take a split of each assignment, right? And we deal in $3,000 to $5,000 widgets, depending on the complexity of the assignment.
Yes.
Obviously, there can be, the assignments with, significant scope of work. You can to triple, double, quadruple that fee, right? But generally, it's a volume business. And if you focus on multifamily, you're likely dealing with the agencies. So Fannie and Freddie, you're doing some of the community and regional banks are lenders on the small balance or small, multifamily work.
Yes.
You get to see a lot of different client types, right? And so you're able to really cast a pretty wide net on business development. And you want to make sure that when you've introduced yourself and your team to a client, that you're always able to provide a meaningful turnaround time and fee for them. So what impacts turnaround time and fee typically is supply and demand, right? So
yes,
if you're at capacity, fees tend to go up, turn times tend to spread out, and that's not what our clients like to see, because they compete on speed as well. So they need to get their third-party reporting done in a timely manner. And so as I was leveraging my team and the processes and ensuring that, the database that we did have available to us was up to date and could be leveraged throughout our whole team and anybody else touching multifamily in the Midwest. It just became clear that in order to, really increase productivity across the platform, because at this point, so I grew my team from 2 of us to about 6 of us over a 5-year time period.
Yes.
And then I took on a national role as the multifamily specialty practice group. And during that time, and being a producer myself, I was able to call around and, talk to 60 different professionals who had been appraisers for, anywhere from 10 to 25 years at this point, and talk to them about what they're seeing in the market, and also overlay that with the client surveys we had been doing. And generally, every producer I talked to indicated that there was some pretty significant burnout occurring, because the number of transactions were increasing at a point where, and it was actually a diminishing return, because at that point, the commercial general or certified general population is declining and was declining at the time, right? So there was a stat that we use often over a 4 or 5 year period. Multifamily transaction volume alone increased by 74%. And the number of appraisers decreased by 10% over that same time period.
Ooh.
And you really saw that in, kind of coming out of COVID. So end of 2020 through beginning of last year, 2022, you really saw that supply and demand issue come to a head, because you had, appraisers allowing for, or having to quote turnaround times that would push from 4 to 6 weeks out. And sometimes that's the life of a overall loan transaction. That's right. So they can't be waiting for our profession to catch up with the capital market. So that's where, while I was at my prior firm, we had started talking about how do we leverage technology beyond just a web-based database? How do we get the database to integrate more with our appraisal workflow? And it really, all signs led to, you need to build a web-based application. So at that point, I think I had gotten my team as efficient as they possibly could be on the legacy templates, which at the national firms you've got a property record database, right? And that's a web-based application that's a single sign-on, and people can go in, but it pretty much starts with a blank slate. There's not a lot of direct integration to those at that time. And it's also incumbent on appraisers and analysts to actually fill the database, right?
Yes.
But then the way the legacy templates work is the database then dumps into Excel, and then there's a communication using macros between Excel and Word. So it's all very Microsoft based. Once it gets into Excel and Word though, Michael, that is highly manipulable. That Excel and Word is very manipulable. And that means that if you're under a national brand, you could have a completely different output at the end of the day in, Chicago versus Dallas. And that's not what our clients of national firms want to see. They want to see consistency across the national platform. And so the other thing that occurs once data gets dumped into Excel and Word and then ends up in a flat PDF is you end up losing a lot of the information and all those valuable, physical inputs, economic inputs, assumptions that appraisers come up with, the ultimate conclusion of value. All that valuable information sits in an Excel and Word and then a PDF and then just lives there forever and dies. So
got it. Yes.
Whereas if you're using a web-based application like the firm that I ended up joining in January of 2020 has built and uses, you can ensure that the data that is leveraged in an appraisal report, and starting with multifamily, which is what my current company does, you can ensure that every data point and assumption along the way is recorded and usable for the future.
Got it. So it's not only input, but it's recorded and it's there for posterity as well, so that it's not having to recreate the wheel every single time.
That's right. And out of that, you end up with volume, right? And the more volume you do, you end up with a critical mass of data points, and you can start to do some proprietary trending and analytics on various comps or individual expense line items, and really do some pretty interesting analytics, which is where we are now.
That's phenomenal. Now, for people that have never worked at a firm, maybe of the size you've been in, I did hear you say that you had grown your team from 2 to 6, and did you mention that you ascended to a position of the National Multifamily Practice Group leader?
That's right. Yeah, I did that.
What's that like, Meghan? I mean, here you are, you've moved between 2 strong markets in the United States, and now you're ascending to a different role, which is a practice leader. I mean, you were, as you mentioned, I think you mentioned about, in your role in Chicago, but now you're accounting for, all kinds of places and things.
It was a very rewarding position because I used it. I again dipped into my research, skills, and just called around, had a lot of conversations with what individual appraisers were seeing, and it became pretty clear that there was a constant theme either between the appraisers themselves and our client base. And the two main themes were the appraisers were clearly overworked. It was taking way too much time to keep up with the volume. They were missing a lot of vacations. There were some family dynamics that were broken down because of the number of hours folks were having to work. And it just seemed like we were at a critical point of quality of life needed to be a consideration for these fee appraisers. And I saw an opportunity where, some additional training for the next generation of appraisers would help with that, as well as digital innovation, ensuring that all the data is available, in one spot. And you kind of end up, we call it now the democratization of data, right? So you can ensure that it is all that valuable comp information at national firms that sits in, various PDFs, Excels, some in a property record database, right? And a lot of it just ends up being dislocated throughout a national network, and it's hard to really get a good analysis going if the information is not all in one spot. So over that time frame, it was clear that a web-based application would fix that. The other part that became clear was that the clients were really starting to notice that there was a dislocation of data because they were getting inconsistent reporting, inconsistent quality throughout the nation. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that, appraisers were trying to crank out a lot of reports quickly to keep up with demand. But one of the first things that falls if you don't have any kind of QA or QC in there or ability to put together a report in a more efficient manner, the first thing to go is quality. And so in order to combat that, you need to solution for how do you make the end-to-end valuation process more efficient. And we believe that the web-based application has done that. It's also more intuitive of a tool to use. So we've found that the younger generation is really able to get up to speed and become pretty effective producers in a more condensed manner than they can at some of the other firms.
That's amazing. And maybe one thing, because there's very few people in their career would have an opportunity to be promoted to a position of national practice leader. What type of activities, responsibilities did you have moving from, being responsible in Chicago to a national practice leader? Does that mean that you're sitting in closed door meetings all the time, or you're flying around the country all the time, or are you signing reports all the time? Or what type of things are you involved in moving from the one role to the other while you were still at the firm?
Yeah, it was a lot of communication around best practices. First, I found out, who were the top producers, who was doing things effectively, how could I take that and scale it for the other teams and introduce them to give them a little bit of quality of life back. And then also just, with multifamily, there are various lending sectors and different reasons that a multifamily client may want an appraisal, right? So part of it was just educating some of the staff that we had that were multifamily specialists throughout the nation that may not have ever worked on an agency assignment. So introducing them to what the Fannie and Freddie requirements are, really introducing them to what is needed when you're doing work for an owner-operator, a quarterly and annual review, providing the templates on the affordable side to really understand how to put together a LIHTC or a subsidized valuation. No matter what market it's in, it's all methodology is pretty much there. So the local market experts know their market. What they need is just the tools to be able to understand, how different scopes of work are different. And at a national firm, you're rarely starting from scratch. So it's really that role was connecting the dots and making the connections between the various professionals who had different skill sets.
And you threw in a word, I caught it, and I'm very familiar with what you were speaking to, but maybe for those that are not, you mentioned LIHTC, LIHEAP. What are those low-income valuation assignments? Because there's a whole different component in there for those that are in appraisal, but maybe have never dealt with that subset of specifically multifamily.
Yeah, that acronym stands for Low Income Housing Tax Credit. And it's an affordable program through federal government, and it's a way to build affordable housing throughout the nation or renovate affordable housing. And it's definitely a good niche for somebody that's interested in valuing those types of properties. It's a little bit more, right? It's extra. You have to understand the programs. You have to have 2 sets of rent comps, 2 sets of sale comps, so, but it's great. Once you're an expert in that, I will tell you this, that the pool of folks that focus on that or the competition is lighter in that world. So, but it does take some time to understand it. You don't want to just kind of go in it blind because you'll be exposed pretty quickly if you're not leveraging the expertise of someone within your firm. So.
There's no better way to find out that you haven't honored the client than to say yes to something that you didn't confirm what it was before you said yes. I remember back many years ago, to your point, someone who I had gotten to know quite well, owned a lot of buildings in Chicago. He's like, hey, we'd love to have you help out with some of these tax credit deals. I'm like, how? He goes, well, we need appraisals. And I'm like, yeah, I don't think I know it. He said, no, I think you could do it. I'm like, I don't know that I'm not saying I don't think I could do it. I'm just saying I don't have the data, haven't done this before. He's like, no, man, we'd love to have you do it. And I'm like, I appreciate your encouragement. Can you give me a couple days and let me look into it? And I called someone who I knew that it was very familiar with it. They specialize in it. They're like, Michael, this is a great space to get into. If you want to specialize in it, it's going to take time. It's going to take effort. It's going to feel monotonous at first because there's so much more work that you do, but it's actually very rewarding. And, part of it's flow. I mean, you need to be doing these. You can't just do one off. He goes, if you want to get in, do it. And if not, this might be one of those times to say no. So I called back my buddy. I'm like, man, I am so grateful that you asked. And I think I should just see you socially from now. Just keep seeing you socially and not be helping out on the low-income housing appraisal stuff. And he goes, well, I appreciate your honesty. I'm disappointed, but I respect your answer. And we'll keep working with the firm that we're working with. I'm like, well, they're specialists like that. I called somebody on that team. I didn't know that's who you were working with, but I think you should stay with them. They're really good. So there's something to be said about that for that consistency that comes from specialization.
That's right. It is very important to know your limits or do the homework beforehand, right? And create that competency before you deliver.
So when you are at this role now of connecting the dots as a national practice leader and best practices across the firm, looking to increase consistency, trying to improve the quality of life and the results of your team, are you getting to do any appraisal at this point, or have you moved on from that and you're more just maybe reading them now and then as opposed to producing them with a team, trainees and CGs, or how does that work along the way?
That's right. So it took, when we first launched the new venture, we launched it with 7 of us total. So of course it was all hands on deck during that startup time. We were the subject matter experts. We were interfacing with the product managers and the developers, explaining, what was needed to create a web-based application. The databasing part was one thing that was already, there was a good template for that across different industries. But what was different, with us is we took the entire end-to-end process and made it a web-based application. So it's the appraisal workflow. It's the selection of comps. You only enter information once and it flows through into the report editor, which is also cloud-based. So there is no Excel or Word in our process anymore. It is 100% web-based application, which again lends itself to that, being able to record and warehouse the data and create some trending analytics on it. But so when it was just a few of us and we were starting out, we started with 7 and we grew towards the end of 2022. We ended up around 90 professionals. So it was a very quick growth, opened up nationally within 18 months. And it was, quite a wild ride because we launched and it was COVID, right? And we, made it through that. It allowed us to really continue to develop the technology because we needed that extra few month window to really start to leverage the technology we had built. So we put our first report through in August of 2020. And I'm proud to say that at no point in the last, since then, has there been any catastrophic fails. We've always been able to finish a report, which is pretty great because this technology is ours. No one else can claim they have this type of scale and ability to process appraisal reports for lots of different clients throughout our national network in volume like we have. And so to answer your question, am I still appraising? I'm still consulting for sure. Clients.
Yes.
One of the things that we do often is put together quick snapshots of different asset classes throughout different markets and provide that upfront to our clients in terms of how cap rates have changed or how, because of the data aggregation, we're able to run some pretty meaningful proprietary analytics and service our prize clients that way. And it's been pretty neat. But the day-to-day, I'm the group head of our division.
Yes.
So I'm no longer focused on, recruiting and developing in the Midwest specifically. I still do a lot of recruiting. I will read appraisals, once in a while when my signature is required contractually from different clients. But I've really given up more of the day-to-day and focus on really sticking to the mission and making sure that our strategy is in play and that communicating that across our entire platform. Training, one of the things we've really set our sights on, aside from the technology and innovation we've been doing there, it's been training. So we recognize that our valuation profession for a long time hasn't been all that attractive for the younger generation to come into. It's been a lot of legacy, family type stuff. And even then they're tending to leave the profession instead of continue to grow their family business. And because of that, we see a real need for, obviously the human element, like we can automate as much as we possibly can, but at the end of the day, humans want to talk to other humans. Someone's got to explain the subject property and how it fits into the market and really back up an opinion of value that does have an individual signature on it. So I don't really foresee a scenario where we ever get to full automation without any humans. I think that humans will start to leverage AI to make our lives easier and be able to take more vacations. So, so because of that, we really have focused on growing the next generation of appraisers because of the older population that we know we have. There's a lot of retirements coming. And so we've really made it a priority to train the next generation of appraisers with a real eye towards diversity and inclusion there.
So Meghan, could I interrupt just for a minute? Because you made an important transition that you and I are both aware of. I have the privilege of knowing you for a number of years, but maybe other people were not. So in your role, you were successfully guiding a national practice group, and then a change came about. That's something that, is part of our theme here in season 2 of the podcast, which are intentionally connecting with peers who have made changes or impacting change in the industry for good. How is it for you from a professional standpoint? You were from the Midwest. You had early on touched on your desire to be in the Chicagoland area for proximity to the, I would say to extended family. Grandparents probably were a big factor in that, as well as now handling national practice group. And then you go and make a change. What, were you looking for a change, or did somebody just come along and just kind of pluck you out of the sky and like, hey, congratulations, here's a new home? How did that happen? Because that's something most people aren't aware of, the value of relationships.
Yeah, I was not looking for a change, and I do very much value relationships and loyalty, and had no real reason to leave my company, the only company I had ever worked for. At that point, I was going on 16 years. And
wow, 16 years at one company.
Yeah.
Impressive.
But different service lines, remember? So I was always engaged in learning, and that was important to me. And I had a lot of opportunities to transition and grow, and always felt challenged. So there was a point in time where we started to leverage prop tech groups. One was Chicago based. We were using them for rent roll and P&L parsing. So that's where you can take a 500 unit rent roll, drop it onto an interface, and it'll give you a meaningful unit mix to analyze, right, in your reports and stuff. And the same thing for profit and loss statements, right? So the P&Ls, operating statements that we're constantly dealing with, you end up with 3 years of history that you're trying to analyze, and that sometimes ends up with 800 different expense categories, right, that you have to aggregate and put together. So there are parsers out there. And we were leveraging, while I was at my prior firm, one of the prop tech groups for those types of parsing capabilities, and as well as a rent algorithm that they had, which was aggregating a lot of the multifamily rent comps that we had been using. So through that group, they actually they were acquired by my current firm. And so
really? So you're actually you're in the marketplace, like so many of us do, using a technology solution, and the solution that you're using actually gets acquired.
That's right. And when they were acquired, that is when my name that was put. It was around the same time that the group I've been with decided to start a valuation platform. And so when they started the valuation platform, they were looking for certified generals and MAI. And so my name came up through that prop tech group in Chicago, and I had a recruiter call, and it was, an interesting partnership that had been put together. It was Walker and Dunlop and Geo5.
Yes.
And I knew of both. Obviously, Walker and Dunlop was a client, knew of the prop tech group that they had acquired as well. So they had been making some really good fintech investments, and they were on my radar. And then Geo5, as a global data science analytics tech company, that was pretty clear to me that they had put together a pretty powerful partnership. And it was a much smaller firm than what I was at. And I could just see that they had all the ingredients to put together what I knew needed to be done in the valuation space, and not just for appraisal purposes, but really just for the ease of integrating data with our clients, making quick valuation decisions, whether it's for appraisal purposes, acquisition purposes. Like buyers and sellers, owner and operators, they need valuation understanding at every step of the way, right? And what do you need for that? You need data. You need quick, clear data that has been normalized. And there's no better place, in my opinion, than an appraisal group to normalize it. So it's...
Second that one, 2 thumbs up there, Meghan.
So I found the proposition to be just one that, because Walker and Dunlop was so well capitalized and Geo5 had such great data analytic capabilities, and Walker and Dunlop was a significantly smaller firm in terms of headcount. And so I could tell that it was just I thought that what they were putting together was going to get to the end result quicker. I really just made a calculated decision to join the group that I have here at Appraiser now, and it's been paying off ever since. So it's been about just over 3 years.
Congratulations. Yeah, I think that's fantastic. I mean, the steps that you've taken along the way, they're all publicly documented. So none of this is I would say, proprietary information, but it's always wonderful to have that kind of inside view where, along your career, you're seeing opportunities, you're seeing challenges, going all the way back to the very beginning. You're referencing that, the answer isn't necessarily yes, but it's not necessarily no, but let me have some time to explore that. And through the course of your career, I've understood that you're seeing both opportunities and challenges. And one of the firms that you all were having some improvement with in terms of process and the ability to analyze data was also one that, you and I briefly talked about, that I had looked at investing in and was introduced to really early on and was impressed with what they were doing. And because of your engagement there, and again, the quality of relationships, you get an unexpected phone call. And now here you are working with a tech-enabled firm that's focused right on multifamily and really harnessing a lot of innovative results for clients that had not yet been done at the scale that Appraiser is doing. Wow. So what's it like sitting at that seat at the table compared to maybe being at a larger firm and, dealing with larger firm things? I heard you say it's a smaller firm and you're with technology and your parent company is an investor in technology to help improve the impact for clients. How's that dynamic? That's one that almost none of us get an opportunity for. But I'd love to hear what it's like from your viewpoint.
Yeah, I mean, it's a smaller firm by way of just pure, number of people, right? Both are publicly traded companies, but one has 50,000 staff globally, and the other one has like 1,400. So it was much easier to make decisions, have access to the decision makers, understand how you fit into the overall strategy of the services firm that we were part of. And it was, but it hasn't all been roses, right? The market has been throwing us, punches left and right in terms of, the past few years, whether it was the uncertainty of the few months of COVID or the high transaction volume market while we were, building. We always say we were kind of, building the airplane as we were flying it, right? We started a valuation platform from scratch, and that was no simple endeavor.
Wow.
It took every single person over the course of the past 3.5 years that have been a part of the team, and some have come and gone, but we keep going, and we're all very proud of what we've built, to date. And we do leverage the most cutting edge appraisal technology out there. There's a lot of our competitors that tend to say that they're tech enabled, and it rubs me the wrong way because, there's really only one firm that can say they're tech enabled, and I can define it 6 ways a Sunday for you on what that means. So,
how about 2 of the ways? What are the 2 main ways? Obviously, you got the web-based, you have the integration, you have that ability with technology and proprietary data to pull things together. You've specialized in one asset. I also hear that you said you took the time to build it from scratch, so you weren't operating off of a legacy system. And I would assume your effectiveness is higher, if not radically higher, than what you were accustomed to where you spent the majority of your career.
That's right. So I think that the best point I have is it is speed, right? And speed's just a byproduct of data aggregation, the efficiencies that come from that. And the other part about it is the web-based application is far more intuitive than the macros and the various cell references that come between a Microsoft Excel and Word integration. It is very complicated once you get into those, templates that are out there. And it's much harder, Michael, to get a junior appraiser up to speed in those templates than it is on our web-based application. So we are able to get a trainee up to speed and end-to-end in the valuation process far quicker than we were at our legacy firms on the legacy templates. And I would say the biggest point of reference I have is that at the top of the height of the market in the fourth quarter of 2021, I mean, you had appraisers bidding 4 to 6 weeks out, even for multifamily, because they just were at max capacity.
Yes.
And if you talk to an appraiser who's at max capacity, you should trust them. They can do a lot of volume. They're paid on a commission basis. So that's how busy everybody was. That said, though, on the multifamily side, which is a little bit quicker, you really doesn't take more than, like a 2 to 3 week is kind of a standard turn time. We can offer 1 week as needed. And because our system is that speedy. But the real crux of it was in the fourth quarter of 2021, when our competitors for multifamily, primarily on the agency side, were averaging around 3.5 week turns. Appraiser was at a 2.5 week turn. So we were a full week faster, and very proud of that data point, because it really showed the 24 months of innovation we had put in and training our staff on it paid off for our clients.
That's fantastic. I mean, you love to have that type of differentiation that is quantitative. I mean, qualitative is wonderful, but quantitative, there's nothing like the numbers. You're like, yeah, you need that in 2.5 weeks? Sure. You got to charge me more? I'm like, no, I don't necessarily need to. Maybe I will, but I don't necessarily need to. And they're like, oh, fantastic. We can keep our deals moving quicker, because there is that sense of a deal fatigue that happens when things wear on for a long period of time that many people on the transaction side never get to experience.
That's right. And, I've recruited a lot of our professionals throughout the nation, particularly our senior appraisers that are team leads, have come from, similar national firm backgrounds as myself. And it's been awesome to see them come in, leverage the technology, and acknowledge how much more efficient they are and how much, happier their teammates are in working in that compared to, the Excel and Word templates that were available to them. It's not to say that we can't solve everything on the web-based application.
You can't? I thought, Meghan, come on. I thought you could. I mean, with Willie leading the helm there, come on. He is high energy, big picture thinker. I figured between the two of you having like coffee once every couple of weeks, virtual, if nothing else, you guys have already solved the problems of the world.
Well, it's one thing to have all the ideas out there. It's a whole nother to actually develop the product that's going to satisfy the needs, to scale, right? So that's one thing that, you asked what it's like to sit in my position. It's been, highly rewarding to see a lot of this come to fruition, but it's also come with its own level of change management, right? I feel like I'm a psychologist at this point, or should have a background in psychology, just to, kind of be able to meet people where they are and get them through the overall concept of it's not that the way that they were doing things was wrong. It's just, this is a neat, new, interesting way to do things. And here's a subset of people who are highest producers, and it's clear that they're, satisfying clients in a timely manner and prefer to use the application. And so we leverage those success stories to really make sure that the rest of the groups kind of see that and ultimately adopt, because adoption is probably the biggest, part of when you develop something new. Is it's not a useful tool if only 30% of your, staff is using it, right? And you can't really understand what additional features or improvements need to be done, again, if 30% of your staff is using it. So we have 80-90% use on the application across the nation for multifamily. And so we can glean a lot of valuable feedback from all the reports we put through our application.
That's fantastic. And, Meghan, one thing we always appreciate hearing about from peers like you who are creating the future, as you said, a bit of flying the plane while you're building it. What excites you? What are you looking forward to over the next, say, 5 years from the role that you now sit in?
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to the market picking back up.
Oh, no, kid. Come on, Meghan. Are you sure? You've got to be kidding. I don't know if there's another appraiser out there, another valuer that would ever say the same thing. Okay. So we totally agree with that one.
Yeah,
we totally agree with that.
It would be nice. I'm calling what we've been in for a good 4 quarters now. It's been stagnation. I'm calling it purgatory because that's what we're in. We're in valuation purgatory at the moment. Purgatory. There's no distress, no meaningful distress at scale, and there's very little transactions, which means appraisers are twiddling their thumbs. But we're staying pretty busy, which we're continuing to grow our market share because we can tell that we're increasing our quarterly revenue at a faster clip than the overall transaction market is falling, right? So we are gaining market share, which is good insights. But I would say in the next 5 years, what I would really like to see is 100% multifamily going through the application, that, and then introducing commercial to it as well, because we've seen, especially on the net lease side, just real efficiencies in leveraging that web-based application. So really continue to improve on the multifamily side, be able to service the commercial side through our application, and then eventually being able to not just make the PDF the deliverable for our clients. I think that there's a real opportunity to, parse out portions of the product and certify it and give it in a even more timely manner than we're able to give the full report, if that makes sense. So I think direct data integration with our clients, more analytics around all the data that's being assembled by, a national valuation firm like ours, and really becoming more of an advisory and consulting to our clients as opposed to a requirement on the back end.
I can definitely appreciate that, especially having spent a lot of time with owners and investors. That ability, as you said, to really fill a seat at the table as opposed to being an ancillary role, sitting in on those conversations, much like you did back in the investment sales meetings, where you're an integral part in conversation with a client, as opposed to just, and send it over there afterwards. Absolutely fascinating. How do you see the role of a real estate valuer and appraiser expanding, changing? I know for myself, one of the fascinating things I consider is I have a relative who is in a role that didn't exist several years ago. which is always amazing. He went to a top tier university, phenomenally talented individual, comes back to Chicago after being out east, and he is a bud tender. I'm like, what is that? He goes, oh, I help people cultivate premium cannabis. I'm like, legit? He's like, no, dude, I get paid well to do this, fancy. I was like, you've got to be kidding me. I'm like, showing my ignorance here, but that leads me to think that there must be a whole host of opportunities in the future that are going to arise for valuation professionals, maybe directly in the lane of appraisal. But if you talked about technology, analytics, a lot of data use, what are you seeing as possible in the future?
New industries are key, especially where it's legal, like Illinois, right? So that's a new industry that created opportunity for your friend. And another new industry that's coming up and out, it's always kind of been around, is this artificial intelligence, right? Like a chat GPT, everything you're hearing about open AI. So I think there will always be, I go back to a lot of times when you start talking about artificial intelligence and machine learning, people just get scared. And normally they get scared or defensive because they think that the only option is for your job to be taken by a computer instead of enhanced by a computer.
Got it.
And that's how we need to start thinking about this, is how do we leverage these tools to make our lives easier? Because, the next generation, the younger millennials, Gen Z, they're not interested in a 60-hour work week, like ever.
Oh, wow. You mean, what are you and I going to do with all that extra free time, right, hanging out with this next generation? My goodness.
To have some hobbies back, Michael, as opposed to your podcast. You can have 3 more podcasts about something besides appraisal. No.
Goodness.
So I think that what the future holds for appraisal, experts is really to start thinking of yourself as a value add in the process as opposed to a requirement. Embrace the technology that's available to you. Embrace the technology that's available to you to get a little time back in your life, because we all deserve that. I think that, the way we think of our application is it's not an automation. It's kind of more of a co-pilot, right? Think of like we use a plane analogy a lot. In terms of like when you board a commercial airliner, like, can it fly itself? Yes. Do you want to get on without the humans in the cockpit? No. So it's
got it.
I think that there will always be a place for appraisal professionals to be the storyteller, to be the person that explains and really takes ownership of the valuations that are coming out from their firm. I think the other opportunity in this space is to be a subject matter expert. That's going to be key.
Yes. And what do you see as some of the SME possibilities for professionals? I mean, especially if they're considering, because it is, like you said, it's a bit of purgatory right now, but it's also a wonderful time to be reinvesting in your skills, maybe even building out something as a capability that didn't exist before. What do you get to look at from your spot in the industry? I would say that is near the front of the plane versus most of us that are probably sitting in cattle. I meant coach towards the back of the plane.
I think it's data analytics would be an area that I think would be important. I think there's a lot of, fintech and prop tech firms out there that say, hey, I've assembled this. Who would use it? How would you use it? Or I've built this neat tool that we think might work, for this group. But then we thought, of the appraisal groups, I mean, even to the point where there's, photo recognition and getting into the condition of the photos and the asset itself from the photos that are cleaned, right? So I think that the opportunities are endless to be SME in our industry.
I share that perspective and have, like you, allocated time, not a ton, but an allocated amount of time in any week and definitely every month to talk to people in that capacity. It's like, hey, what are you doing? What are you seeing? I just consider it fascinating just to kind of get a sense of what's your view out of the window of the plane. If I'm sitting in the middle seat, I can't see. And I've heard a lot of the same things, but you're at the forefront and you're actually driving those changes. So it's so valuable from not only myself, but hopefully everyone listening in to understand what might be available. Any suggestions you have in terms of how they might start to either gain awareness or even start to build some of their skills, since you are involved in training up the new generation coming into the industry?
So, I have the utmost respect for this industry. I think that risk mitigation, I think we play a really integral role in the capital market stack. I think that, improving how we solve for value, create a credible opinion of value and support it in an efficient manner is going to be helpful for our generation, the older generation, and, the younger to come. I think that technology is what the younger millennials, or all millennials, and the Gen Zers are looking for in their chosen profession. So if you're investing in technology, it's going to be noticed in terms of your ability to retain talent, attract and retain talent. So I think it's been important to me to continue to improve the profession that I chose all those years ago. I've met a lot of great friends and mentored a lot of folks throughout the industry, and I'll continue to do that. From this position and beyond. I think that the valuation industry is fantastic for new grads. It's like I said, there's a real opportunity. Most commercial real estate service lines are heavily relationship based and heavily family oriented, right? And it's a lot of legacy relationships and that kind of thing. It doesn't have to be on the valuation side. We can really take somebody who's maybe first generation college grad and doesn't have any, corporate hooks in yet in terms of family members, and get them to a really nice position in their career quickly through this democratization of data and training them in a more efficient way of valuing properties. And the minute they have this background, even it's for 3 years in the valuation space, right? You now have a full understanding and all the connections that have come from being at a firm like ours, where there's investment sales opportunities, capital markets opportunities, multifamily finance agency, and servicing, closing. There's all kinds of opportunity beyond the appraisal, group if you're at Appraiser, by Walker and Dunlop. And I think that's it's just a great gateway for the younger generation to learn about our profession, understand commercial real estate, how we fit in, and then grow from there. I think there's a lot of great skill sets you can glean from starting your career in the appraisal profession. And even if you go to a different service line, there's always a path back, right? I'm proof of that. So
that is true. Well, Meghan, we are so grateful for your time today. It's amazing how fast these conversations go by, and covering so much in such a short amount of time. Not as many people have an opportunity to spend their whole career at only 2 firms, and yet nonetheless, as you said, get into the industry just because someone said, hey, you might want to take a look at this. And now you have an opportunity to lead the industry. And so excited for what the next decade will bring with your involvement and your outlook. So we just want to say thank you so much for being our guest in this segment of the Perusings, the Power of Values podcast.
Of course, I appreciate you having me. And if any of your listeners want to learn more about what we're doing at Appraiser or my career, feel free to hit me up on LinkedIn.
Absolutely. You'll have all that information there in the show notes. We're so grateful. And again, just want to say thank you to everyone who continues to provide fantastic encouragement, feedback, appreciation, and gratitude for these conversations. Also appreciate some of the suggestions coming in for what we might do in future seasons. But this season, just such a wonderful array of peers involved in valuation and bringing technology in as a way to enhance the value that they're delivering for clients, which increases our place in the market, not decreasing it. So grateful for Meghan, so grateful for this conversation. And until our next podcast, coming very soon, well, I just invite you to continue to share this out to your peers. Like Meghan said, it comes back to that adoption rate. So I don't know that we're at 80 to 90%, but we're grateful each and every week that more and more people are hearing about this and getting to receive some of this news, some of this insight, some of this perspective for themselves, for their profession, or maybe even for peers. So with that, we'll bring this to a close. And we say again, thank you so much and have a great day.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode of Perusings, Appraisers on Purpose. We hope you enjoyed learning from the amazing life paths and achievements of our guests. Don't forget to like us on LinkedIn and other podcast channels to hear more from appraisers and valuers regarding their life and their work. If you have any suggestions or questions for future episodes, we'd love to hear from you. Just send us a message on LinkedIn and we'll be sure to get back to you. Thanks again for listening, and until we're together again for the next session of Perusings, Appraisers on Purpose, create the change that you seek.